One thing that we were kind of going back and forth about before we chose to read this together is how Machine Man began in the 2001 comic book. And so I thought maybe a good way to start would be for Christopher to just kind of sum up what's happened up to this time before the Machine Man comics.
I think that's a good idea. I have plenty of notes throughout that say just ask Calloway.
Great. Put me on the spot. Yeah, ask away. The 2001 series, that started as a Treasury edition adaptation of the film that Jack had penciled and also kind of wrote. I don't know if he was the writer of it, but he did kind of condense it down for that Treasury edition. And then it spun off into a series, which was great because he could take it in a whole different direction or pursue it a little further, deeper than the movie did, I should say, not going a whole different direction, but seeing how other people interacted with the monolith and what their fate was after interacting with it. Did they evolve? Did they become the new seed, or did they stay where they were? And towards the end of the series, which means the license was running out and they had to wrap it up soon because it was a Metro Goldwyn Mayer property and they had the license to it. And I don't think it's been reprinted because of that. I haven't seen it in a trade or anything. Last 3 issues, those were Mr. Machine, not Machine Man. Reason, I didn't know this, but apparently there was a toy or something called Machine Man that was too similar, so they had to change up the name later for the comic Machine Man. But he was Mr. Machine, X-51, part of a failed X project where the robots all eventually gained some self-awareness, and that self-awareness created an identity crisis, and they went nuts. So they would just say, why am I here? Why am I here? Who am I? And they would freak out, and the security force would just wipe them out. And then decided, let's destroy all these X models. They're not working out. The project's done, except for one, X-51, who was raised as a son by Dr. Stack. He gave him a face, which gave him some sense of identity versus just that metal faceplate with X-51 on his forehead. And he set him free. And then needlessly sacrificed himself. I don't know why he held onto the bomb. There was a bomb implanted in X-51 in all the X models. So that way, when they wanted to wrap up the project, they just hit the self-destruct button. But the doctor removed that bomb and then held onto it and looked at it until X-51 then flew away and then blew up. And then we find out what happens to him as things go along. But yeah, it was interesting that he interacted with the monolith, X-51 did. And at first I thought, well, what's the point? I mean, I don't see where that's really germane to what's happening to X-51. Was it even necessary to be part of the story? Because it really didn't have any effect on him. He didn't evolve, of course. He's a machine. But I think one thing that, Shaw, you brought up too, was his finding his own destiny, his own way. He was like, no, I want to find my own path. I don't need to take this path. And I think that's where it is really instrumental, why it's important to have the monolith there, because he's not going to follow a path of evolution, not being organically human, but being very much like a human being in all other aspects, a very nice, intelligent, well-meaning human being. Just his makeup of his body was different, but he chose his own path. He did not follow the path that was put before him by the monolith. So I guess in that way, it was very important. And then later, the series launched as Machine Man, and then we picked up with Aaron Stack, X-51, now Machine Man. I wrote a lot more than that, but I don't remember any of it.
I think that was perfect. That's the perfect summary. But I love that Treasury edition led to 2 spin-offs. The series, the 2001 series, and then Machine Man itself. And if you're expecting 2001 style, that cosmic art style in Machine Man, you're not going to get it. The first couple of issues of Machine Man are kind of mundane, and it's perfect, right? It's this fantastic machine in a mundane world. It's him rescuing hikers, riding on skateboards. Even the Kirby devices aren't very Kirby-esque. It's just dune buggies, skateboards, tank treads. I was wondering, you know, compared to all of the other Kirby books we've talked about, you know, Black Panther, the Eternals, Captain Victory, does this one feel evenly paced? Does it feel like it's crammed with too many ideas?
You're hitting on exactly what I was just going to say about your last comment, and that is of the stories we've read, this one has, you know, 3-4 characters,
Yeah.
and that's it. We have Machine Man, we have a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever he is that he stumbles onto and befriends, that gives us an interesting take on these sort of ideas of what is it to be human, what is it to have consciousness. We have a general who is hell-bent on Machine Man's destruction because he wiped out my battalion and stole my eye.
And he won't let that go either. He lets you know every single issue that he lost an eye and his men.
Right. And that's about it, you know, for our cast of characters. And that was an amazing switch from what we've been reading in the past to me. This is a story stripped down to its bare essentials. You know, we meet a couple characters on the way, a politician who's greedy and out to use this for his own purposes, and later we meet an evil organization who wants to use his technology to make a fortune. You know,
an empire of conqueror robots as well, intergalactic conquerors.
Yeah, but as far as the story goes, by my take of it, this is kind of the simplest, most stripped down story we've read, I found that it was refreshing, but it was like, wow, this feels a lot less Kirby to me in a lot of ways, except that he's keeping up his themes of you know, now he's taking his big cosmic themes and he's bringing them down to those themes within the human mind, and how do we explore these? It reminds me a little of Mike Allred's Madman, where, you know, it's a very personal kind of spiritual story almost, where he's contemplating his existence.
Yes, it is much more introspective. It is much also less cosmic adventure than it is Meet Inspector Gadget, because he whips out all the gadgets. But I concur completely. This is, I think, one of Jack's finest works, and it is more stripped down and focused. I think it's second only, in my opinion, to Captain America's Mad Bomb story. This is much more accessible, much more fun in a way, but also very serious. And one of the things I noticed about this too is that, and I can't remember if this was in the 2001 issues, is that he makes mention, or the young boy he meets in the woods who's looking for help to fix the flat tire on his aunt's car. He mentions like, oh, you must be a Marvel superhero. He mentions Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom. That's about as integrated as Kirby's going to get with the Marvel universe, but he did mention it. So that was definitely either something he chose to do, or the guys in the bullpen were ribbing him and they're like, come on, Kirby, get with it. Yeah. So that mentioning that was kind of cool, but that's it. That's tip of the hat to the Marvel universe. But I think this is a fresh break for Kirby in the sense that this wasn't a character that Stan and Jack worked on like the Black Panther. So there's no expectation. Is why isn't this like what he did back in the 60s? Why isn't this like the Fantastic Four? This is just Jack's. This is his creation stemming out of 2001. So I think, at least in my opinion, it helped to separate him from those expectations of why isn't like what went before? Why is it so odd? Even though there is some oddness about it, but I'll talk about that later.
When you mentioned that it is an Inspector Gadget comic, that was going through my head a bit too. There was a definite aspect of fun to that, and you think of Mr. Fantastic who could do these interesting things with his body. That said, though, I think compared to Plastic Man, Jack Cole's creation from, you know, the 40s, it felt more like that to me than his own Mr. Fantastic, because the Jack Cole Plastic Man's, you can see such a sense of fun and imagination in how can I use this body in this elastic way. Oh, I can do this and this and this. Mr. Fantastic, it seemed almost kind of a peripheral little, oh yeah, and also he can stretch, but it wasn't about the imagination of how do we use that stretchiness. Whereas Machine Man, I felt there was a real imagination. Oh, if this is a robot and he's made of parts, look at what we can do with these parts. He can disconnect this and attach it to here, and he can find some wheels and attach the wheels to himself, and he can drive around like this. He can take the power blast from his fingers. He can open up his shin guard and insert those into there to attach them to his jets and his feet, and that allows for a greater propulsion. And there's just such an imagination and craziness. And I'm like Transformers and GoBots and things. Those came much later, but it was
Yes.
based on these ideas. There were the Shogun Warriors that had a little aspect of this, maybe around this same time. And so you wonder if that's where he's getting this, or if he's just saying, oh, well, he's a machine and, just coming up with these ideas on his own, but very imaginative and just, you can tell he's having a lot of fun coming up with these ideas.
Christopher, I made notes of every time they mentioned Marvel in this book, and it happens at least once in issues 1 to 3. I did a Star Wars count, which I think it's funny that they put Star Wars ads in a Jack Kirby book in the 1970s.
Yeah.
There's about 1 or 2 per issue as well. And also, to go back to Chris's point with the Mr. Fantastic thing, I think we've all heard the Norm Macdonald Fantastic Four bit where he's talking about, like, why do you have to be called Mr. Fantastic? Shouldn't you be called, like, Mr. Stretch?
There are a lot of great late 70s references in this comic that Jack was mining. I mean, they mentioned Evel Knievel.
Yes.
I was a big fan of Evel Knievel. I had my little Evel Knievel action figure. And
We all did.
Mine those things up and shoot off, and the canyon rocket, I had that too. I don't know what happened to him, but and just naming his nemesis 10-4 FOR. I'm just thinking 10-4, good buddy. What?
Yeah.
breaker.
That whole time I was thinking, why FOR?
Yeah.
10 for what?
What? Yeah.
What does that name mean? I was very confused by that.
And another character that came up in his book, I just want to throw this one out real quick.
Yeah.
There was Professor Hiram Girk. See Professor Hiram Girk there? And I saw him, and I'm thinking of when this came out, and I'm thinking, my gosh, it's Chuck Mangione. I mean, it just, minus the glasses, that's who he reminded me of.
I have a note that says Kirby's trying to stay current with this one. Even then, like, he has Machine Man riding a skateboard. Like, I'm imagining him sitting in the passenger seat of Roz's car. They're driving around California, and he sees, like, kids on skateboards, and he's like, I could put that in a comic book. And then he goes home and draws Machine Man. I'm looking at issue number 1, and Kirby's first issues are usually pretty spot on. They're usually perfect first issues. And from the start, there's one change that I noticed, and that if you look at the credits, it has, Petra Goldberg, Jack Kirby, Mike Royer, no editor, because Jack Kirby's the editor. I think this is just a hollow, ceremonial thing that they did, because in the next few issues, you have Archie Goodwin, and then when Goodwin leaves around issue 3 or 4, it's Jim Shooter. So again, this is one of those things where I feel like they give Kirby the freedom to do what he wants at first, and then gradually you start seeing his editorials leave. There are no letters pages until the last issue. Again, we talked about this with Black Panther. When Kirby leaves, the next issue after, they bring back the things that are normal for comics. They bring back the double page spreads. They bring back the letters pages. Stan's soapbox gradually takes up more space in the Machine Man run, and it kind of like squeezes out Jack's editorials. But on a technical level, Jack uses panels that he normally doesn't use. You know, you see these 3 long panels going down. This is a 1970s panel technique. He doesn't do this in New Gods or Fantastic Four. A lot of my Ghost Rider comics, the original Ghost Rider comics, have this panel. Like, there are so many panels of Ghost Rider just riding up a rock wall, and I don't know. Is this to me? It feels like this is just a 1970s technique that he would use. He brings pretty standard panel design with everything. For the most part, it's like 6-panel square pages throughout the book.
Except the book where he disappears because of the kidnappers, I think it was, and then he has this really crazy looking jumbled kind of panel where everyone's panicking and like, oh, he's gone. What's he going to do? And everyone's then their fear is taking over. So now I've never seen Jack do a layout like that before.
No, and I haven't seen him do it, you know, in the set, like from like World War II to the 70s. I've seen him do it in, I think, Superpowers, but that was in the 80s as well. It's those weird things we talked about it. Jack will bring back certain things that he used to do, like those circular panels from, you know, Captain America, his World War II stuff. He'll bring it back in the 80s with Captain Victory. Something like that. That panel you mentioned, and I made note of it. He's never done that before. That's new, you know. And it only happens once. It's that one page. That's what makes it so weird.
Yeah. Well, he uses it to good effect because that's when everyone starts to panic.
Yeah.
And their fear of Machine Man takes over. What's going to happen? Where did he go? What's he going to do?
Now, I was wondering, did the versions you guys read have the editorials in them?
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Well, you have the originals as well. It was just the last few.
I just read the trade. At this point, I do not have the originals anymore, so I missed out on all the editorials.
That has the Ditko stuff in it as well. The Ditko and Wolfman, I have some of those issues. I've never actually read them cover to cover. You know, I love these editorials so much because it gives Jack room to explore why he's doing this book. You know, there are editorials where it's like, the contemporary version would be like, what if your Alexa gained sentience and it came to life, and would it be a friend or an enemy? Would we kill it? Would we befriend it? Would you let a machine man into your home? That's kind of the whole idea of the book. You know, human beings designed the machine man, but then they send the military after it. You know, I have a note that says the military in comics cause their own problems, and then I have Hulk, OMAC, Machine Man written next to it. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Like, it's the idea of, we built the machines, we're the reason these things exist, but we fear them because it's, you know, they might replace us, they might take over, they might turn against us.
Yeah, that seemed to be the theme, because looking through those editorials, Jack said, when I drew him, I visualized Machine Man not as a number X51, but as Aaron Stack, a nice young man of 26 with good scholastic credentials and a person of positive and constructive qualities. But this was the thing he's trying to point out in the series, is he says, somewhere in his wired brain is a godlike element similar or exactly the same as the one that established me as a human being. I'm in the awkward position of giving way to prejudices spawned by fear, which is what you see happen in the book with Colonel Craig, with people around him, Machine Man, as they were afraid of him because he was so much like them, and would he take over? And he would be the opposite. Actually, he was very much more a helpful person or helpful being. You know, Jack said the most interesting thing about this character is what he does is when his back is against the wall. What is he going to do to, quote, fight back? And he really is not, he's more of a defender, and he's trying to help people versus being something to be malevolent and feared. But that's what everybody assumes he is.
Issue 2 has that great line where he runs into the psychiatrist. I'm forgetting his name. It was
Spaulding.
Yeah. And he says that he just wants to be Johnny Average, you know? One of my favorite scenes in the entire Jack Kirby Machine Man series is in issue 2, and it's the first 3 pages, you know, the nightmare sequence. And this was I think like, why would a machine have self-doubt? You know, his empathy, his humanity kicks in where, like, this panel to me is one of the strongest panels, if not the strongest panel for me. You know, he's like, I'm an individual.
This is actually a subject that really got me going down a rabbit hole, because this is AI, and this is, you know, a big topic right now, and it got me interested in the history of AI in science fiction. And you know, a lot of people take it back to Frankenstein. They say that was the first time that a human character tried to create life in this inanimate thing. There's in film Metropolis, right? Brought an actual robot woman into existence. I feel like I'm not a big science fiction person, but I believe Isaac Asimov's I, Robot is kind of the beginning of these kind of big ideas of what does it mean to create a robot with these human characteristics, with a human mind, and if our technology keeps increasing, at what point does it surpass us?
Yes.
Because the mechanical mind theoretically will eventually surpass us, and the mechanical body already surpasses us in so many ways. And so they're the kind of two schools of thought that you know, we're creating it and it will be this thing for good, or alternatively it's going to develop its own conscience and realize how pointless and useless and evil we are, and decide to take over. And so you look at the newer things like, you know, Terminator, but so I, Robot was around the 40s, 50s. It was released in chapters, if I understand. But right around the time before Machine Man, there was 2001, which was simultaneously Stanley Kubrick's film and Arthur C. Clarke's book. They're both working on them together, talking with each other together about ideas, and that developed. In that same year was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick, which was later made into Blade Runner. And so 2001, it has this intelligence that kind of makes this decision, how that you know, I'm going to take things into my own hands, and that's what Kirby kind of used as this basis. That said, Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I believe, is more of the themes and ideas that Kirby's dealing with. This idea of what it is to be this being, and what are the thought processes going into this. When people are fearing you or hating you or whatever. And I just found this fascinating, you know, that this was probably all kind of boiling in the ether at the time. And so interesting to me too that Kirby started with 2001. You know, the Treasury, it was more or less just telling the story of the movie, but then the first 5 issues of 2001 basically just retold, okay, we have a caveman, and here are the caveman adventures, and then we jump to the future, and now it's sci-fi, and here's that same character basically, and how they have elevated to this new thing. But then he breaks out of that completely with Machine Man, and I think you really hit on something there, because you can tell me if you agree, Christopher, but is it not getting in a rut to just retell that same story? It's like a TV sitcom from the 70s, right, where you don't go many places. But then all of a sudden he creates Machine Man, and it's like, here's a new idea that I can kind of sink my teeth into.
Yeah, I agree. If I recall, a lot of people in the letters pages too were saying, so where are you going with this? Because it just seems like a repeat. Okay, first it's a caveman, then it's a cave woman. And some of the stories I really liked, but yeah, where do you take it? It's going to go to the same place every time almost. So Machine Man was really needed to, or Mr. Machine, to break out of the series, and Jack would have fun with it. And he could address a lot of the things about sci-fi that he wanted to get into. And this also reminds me too of Magnus Robot Fighter, Russ Manning's, where, we let the robots take care of us. Everything's great. Life is easy. And then they become self-aware and start taking over.
Yeah.
And that's the fear that people have with this X model that is so much like us. What will he do? Because people come in all shapes and sizes and different philosophies, and they often assume they might turn out just as bad as me. So I'm afraid of them.
Yeah. I appreciate that it's a smaller story. By the end of issue 2, Kirby does have a little bit of, 2001 influences. Like, this is pretty cosmic right here, but it's a small, intimate story. It's just a story of a guy dealing with his existential crisis. I also wanted to note one other thing. I keep looking at this note. It's kind of dumb, but it's page 22 of issue 2, and it says, "What if Machine Man invaded Easy Rider?" It's this page right here.
Uh-huh.
Like, you have the opening scene, and it's like Born to Be Wild is playing, and then this purple guy just
who looks like a UFO pilot.
Yeah.
A lot of mention of UFOs in this too.
When I first started reading the story, I was concerned, is this whole series going to be this general going after this robot? And it went for a little while, but there was this story arc where the general's like, oh, this guy is okay.
Yeah.
And like Machine Man won him over. And then that introduced the next story arc of this evil organization who kidnaps him to study his body parts to duplicate them. And now all of a sudden this general's like, we've got to find Machine Man. And I thought, what a great mature storyline that it's taking this arc and it's not just staying with the stereotype of this and this, black and white, and it kind of turns it on its head. And similarly, there was the alien from space calling out in help, I'm going to be destroyed, and then he's saved, and you realize you saved perhaps the most evil being in the universe. And it seems like I've seen Kirby do that, maybe in the Captain America stories, or it seems like somewhere there was sort of a flip like that. But I really enjoy Eternals. There's the big ugly monster and the beautiful being who it turns out the monster's the beautiful human. And I think those are some sophisticated signs of storytelling when you see this. He's not just saying, okay, this is the structure and I've got to follow it A to B. He's tweaking it as he goes, and he's defying expectations. And nowadays we see that a lot, but in 70s comics, I feel like this was a real rarity.
He did. He didn't go all Thunderbolt Ross with Colonel Craig, right? Because he could have just kept hating Machine Man forever. But I think what happened was that Colonel Craig, although he feared Machine Man, I think because he had qualities of a human being, and that made him fear that. But he found a quality in him that he really respected and identified with, was his integrity. And he had those good human qualities, the kind of qualities a good soldier would have. And I think that's when he started to turn around. He saw some of himself in Machine Man that he liked. Just saying.
There's actual character development in there. And you were mentioning, Chris, the Switch. He did something similar in Sky Masters of the Space Force with Wallace Wood, where there's the exact same plot line. It's like they get the call for help, they go up there, and it turns out to be just like this murderous astronaut guy just picking off Americans in space. Or
look at his cartoons with Thundar the Barbarian. Every cartoon was basically the same cartoon, maybe a new villain.
Yeah.
But that was more kind of the standard setup, and he's not interested in just sticking with that. He's interested in finding new stories.
I wanted to mention, Machine Man and 10-4. Machine Man's design, I look at RoboCop and I'm thinking, did Jack Kirby inspire RoboCop as well? It's that's what Machine Man would look like in live action, in the 80s. You have 10-4 and his Autocrons, and Transformers didn't come out until a little bit after Machine Man, and I'm wondering, did he inspire inadvertently the Autobots and Decepticons? There's the whole idea of machines that are here to protect, and then intergalactic machine conquerors, and the whole idea of like Autobot, Autocron. It's just like, was it like a piece of the Transformers puzzle?
Similarly, there's Westworld, which came a few years earlier, and then in Alien we have the character who it turned out wasn't human. I think these thoughts were just in a lot of people's minds, and probably a lot of them influenced each other, and a lot of them built up new ideas of, I suspect people aren't even aware, and that they're just playing in the same pool.
But like you said, there's just so much to mine here. Oh, by the way, speaking of Shooter, I made a note when I was looking at the credits. They're saying what each person does in the book, what their role is, what their assignment is, and for Shooter, it said something. Let's see here. Where's my note on this? I'm a mess here. Oh, here we go. It said that the issue number 7 was lubricated by Jim Shooter. Now, let's just keep that in context of what he's doing. It's Machine Man. Okay, everything's cool. I just thought that was a strange credit.
Are the other credits kind of machine themed?
No, some of them say like
he is the mechanical hand. He is the mechanical mind. He is the lubricant.
Some of them are just passive aggressive, where it's like micromanaging by Archie Goodwin, traffic signals by Jim Shooter. You mentioned that thing. There's a letters page where straight up he's like, machines might take our jobs, but they'll never take our women. And I'm like,
And we just tapped into some of the 70s references, and one that I thought was, if you look carefully, you can see it. It's when Machine Man opened the dimensional barrier to bring in the alien. And if you look closely here, when things get sucked out of the doctor's office, it looks tragic, all these items being sucked out, but really there's a bright spot, because his console TV was sucked out. Those things are a bear to deal with. They're huge. That was no great loss. That was a victory there.
I was thinking about this when you guys said he's keeping up on 70s things. Mm-hmm. When you look at Kirby's comics, you see the fashion and the hairstyles and that sort of thing, but when you look at look at comics in the 60s, everyone's trying to look like Kirby in mm-hmm. their art style, and that was kind of the order, right? Is okay. This is Kirby's house. We got to keep it as consistent as possible. So you look at Ramita and Buscema's work, and they were early on actually imitating. Coming off of Kirby's books, they're trying to give it that look for a while. Even 70s come around when he returns to Marvel. There's now a very different Marvel style, and Christopher, you can attest to this better than Shaw and I, because you were watching it happen. Was there, when Kirby came back, this sort of feeling of him being the guy out of place now, and him having to work to be, accepted? Because the kids reading comics now, they're wanting stuff that looks like Rich Buckler or John Byrne. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so there, on the one hand, you guys are mentioning he's trying to keep current and stuff, but on the other hand, he's kind of a relic at this point.
He really was, and he really did not fit in. And the bullpen, some of the folks there are really kind of ribbing him and talking behind his back like he was a dinosaur. And even some of the letters and the letter pages, people complain about that. Some love this stuff, but some were saying it just seems kind of out of place. And often I find Kirby's dialogue clunky and odd, but the more I read it, the more I understand what he's doing, because some of the phrases sound kind of odd, like, uh-oh, I believe I started a rhubarb, and it's just, but I'm realizing he's speaking, it's not that he doesn't understand English and sentence composition. This is the way people spoke in his neighborhood when he was growing up as a kid.
Yeah.
And he's still in that mindset. So he'll make a lot of comments like that. Stand clear or you'll wind up as rye toast. It's just strange. But that is the way he spoke, and that's the way he continued to write. He never changed that. And there's kind of a charm to that because it's so different, so odd. But no, it didn't really fit in. And I think that's what hurt him at that point, that he had not evolved some of his writing. But his concepts, though, I mean, they were so relevant and fresh, and today they're still relevant. So it was, I mean, in some ways his dialogue was kind of old and stilted, but his ideas were forging ahead.
Tomorrow's published a piece about Jack Kirby returning to Marvel and how there was office politics about how there were younger writers who thought they could write better than him. They were like, I want Jack Kirby to draw my ideas, but I don't want to have to deal with his writing. I think they took out the letters pages partly for hate mail, but also this isn't written anywhere. I just feel like it's them trying to censor Kirby, maybe cut off his contact with fans, because you could send letters directly to Jack, his Thousand Oaks, California address, and he would respond. But there are no letters pages in Machine Man, not until the last issue. It feels like there's there's definitely some censorship there as well.
And this was his last work for Marvel then? His
Yeah, I think
so
that
and
Devil Dinosaur were the last two that came out before he moved on.
So that's got to have put him in a tough spot.
But I'll send you the piece. It's called "You Can't Go Home Again."
Speaking of what Kirby was looking into and investigating in his philosophy, there was some dialogue in one of the issues, number 6, where Machine Man gets a ride with Barney Bates, the cabbie.
Yes.
And I really liked what he said here, though. And he said, the cabbie said, if the pie gets stolen, there's nothing left for us. You, me, and the badge go hungry. And that made me think about the kind of threats we face as a society, global warming, viruses. Nothing really, this is just my opinion, one man's opinion, nothing's going to really bring us together outside of what Jack actually examines in this book, an existential threat from an extraterrestrial force. Some object from outside all of us would bring this planet together. But otherwise, then the whole pie is taken away. No one's fighting for their piece of control of the earth. No one's just looking out for their own best interests, because all their interests will be taken away. And I thought that little conversation that Machine Man had with Barney Bates was, even though it's a little odd using that kind of the way he wrote that, I think it's exactly spot on. That until you have a threat that's taking everything away, you can't get people together.
That's a theme in all of Kirby's work. It doesn't even have to be those Marvel monster comics. A lot of Kirby's characters are monsters, unless it's like Captain America or Black Panther. You have the Thing, you have the Hulk. It's people who are demonized because they are different in a way. You read those Hulk comics, the Hulk is not the danger in those stories. It's the military who spends their unlimited budget destroying cities to hunt down this one guy that they inadvertently created. Ben Grimm, Jack Kirby often describes, he's just a guy from the Lower East Side. He's not a rock monster. He's just a dude that you want to hang out and have a drink with. But the difference is he can beat up 20 guys at one time. Machine Man, as Christopher mentioned, is just like a 20-something-year-old college student. He just happens to be a robot. One of the things that frustrates me is in issue 5, 10-4, who performs multiple acts of terrorism and threats of intergalactic conquest, gets due process. They just arrest him. Machine Man, who's been helping out this entire time, gets a shoot on sight order.
It's part of the theme of misunderstanding, and it has to do with that little quote you just read us, Christopher, and I think it goes all the way back to World War II and Jack's attitude about you know, how you have to stand up sometimes, right? Because there is a force sometimes that you just have to stop, and you have to say this is not okay. And when you mentioned this cabbie, notice he's an African American character that is giving this speech, and it's given at a time when Machine Man is pointing out what you're talking about, Shaw. Machine Man saying, I risked my life and came to bodily harm trying to save these people who say I'm not one of them and they hate me for it, even though I am saving them, and I'm the only one saving them.
I mean, there's a moment, not to cut you off, but like in issue 4 or 5, there's a moment where he just gives up. He gives up on humanity. There's just like, what's the point? You know,
exactly.
You can't win. Which
so,
in reality, that's a good mindset to have. You can't argue with the wall. You can't argue with stupid. You can't argue, you know.
so this sequence with the cabbie is the culmination of that giving up, and the cabbie convinces him, you're right, I do need to do this. And flip through all 9 issues and tell me, do you see any other African American characters here? And how interesting a choice that he put an African American character in here. You know, nowadays a lot of writers are a lot more careful to try and be more inclusive of more kinds of people. Back then, it wasn't something that was so readily considered, and yet Jack Kirby created the first, you know, African American superhero. He gives this character the mouth to voice what is clearly Kirby's strongest opinions on the matter. I find that very, very carefully considered, and more powerful when you look at it in the context of, you know, the history of African Americans.
Yeah, Kirby made himself very clear about how he felt about the treatment of African Americans, because I don't have the book, but I was reading a segment from it. I think it was Justice Inc., where there's an African American character and he's speaking in kind of a old 40s kind of dialect, you know, like showbiz. And he was putting on an act, and the Avenger says, would you stop talking that way? I find it insulting. You know, I'm offended by it. So you can kind of see where Jack's mind was about all this.
And not to drag it away from the seriousness of the story, but there's that party scene he goes into where, weirdly enough, they're making fun of him, but he feels accepted. Like, he's like, first off, I don't know what kind of party this is. I just wrote swinger party. It's the 7th. But they throw 2 Star Wars references at him. They call him Star Wars and R2-D2, but that's Jack's writing. I don't know if that was editorial doing it, or if he's just like, oh, you know what, they took my ideas, let me just throw them in here. But there's that great moment in issue 5, page 23, where he takes off his face and it's the machine face under it. And whenever he does that, there are aspects of horror in it, you know, like he would do like a dramatic turn, the camera would zoom in on him, then the woman would, you know, shriek. You know, there are small moments, you know, there's small moments. There's, you know, Spalding, there's this reporter that he meets, this woman. He finds acceptance in little ways, but again, being human, he has those moments of self-doubt. You know, one of my favorite panels is panel 3 on page 27, 3 and 4, where he's just punching, just seeing him alone. He waits until she leaves the room and he like breaks the table.
In answer to your party, that issue is dated August. I'm guessing the issue was released in October, and that That's a Halloween costume party.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that it's just that it makes no other mention of
Right.
Halloween. It could be
Yeah.
both, you know. I wanted to mention that if you look at issues 6 and 7, they're inked by Walter Simonson.
I'd like to talk about the politician
Yes.
and the story arc that had this great head of steam at the start and then just dissipated. And I feel like this happens pretty commonly in Kirby comics, where he's got all these ideas and they just kind of fade out as it goes, almost as if he lost track of them because he has so many ideas going. But we have this Senate hearing where we have to decide basically if a robot should have the rights of a human just because a robot can think like a human. And then out of that, we have a politician who realizes he can foment quite a public outcry, boost his own ratings,
Yeah.
and make money and gain power from the controversy he himself creates. And this is a great way to show these kind of ideas in just a silly kids comic book. And it's also something we saw in the 70s and the 80s, all the way up through today. It's a theme that is happening in everyday lives all the time. And here's Kirby having fun with it in a comic.
Yeah, there were a lot of ideas I think Jack was trying to get in there, although I think they're pretty well paced and I don't feel overwhelmed. And there are fewer characters than other books that he wrote at that time. But I think he wrapped it up rather quickly, or maybe editorial did, because I noticed that the preview of the final issue for him, the title was Into the Fire. And then when the book came out, it was In Final Battle. Yeah. So there was a quick change. I'm out of here. I'm done. So maybe that's why some ideas just were kind of left hanging. I would have liked to have seen where he'd taken it, probably far different from where it actually went, because it would be months until the book came back. It jumps over to the Incredible Hulk.
Yep.
You've got Roger Stern writing it, and then it jumps back over, and it goes bi-monthly.
Yeah.
So with Jack, at least it was monthly, and then it started. So I don't know if the interest was being lost, but there was a big gap between it ending and returning. I'm
assuming it was sales already affecting the book before. Jack's books don't tend to run more than 8 or 12 issues, so we're at that length where it was likely ready for cancellation. And Marvel, we know when books are struggling, they'll pop the character into a bigger book, which they did in this case. Or if the book is canceled and there are loose ends they want to wrap up, they pop the storyline into someone else's book, right? So it's following all of these typical scenarios we've seen of books that are canceled.
Did you guys go and read the follow-up, the Steve Ditko, Marv Wolfman stuff? No. Yeah, I have those issues, some of them, and I haven't read them cover to cover ever. I don't know, it feels hollow to me. It just feels like, why even try? If it's not Kirby doing it, then
it's not. Please
go ahead, Christopher.
No, I'm just saying it's not Ditko's best work, and I think I do have that one, and I haven't read it in a while, but I do recall that he changed the size of his eyes on his She-Man to make him look more human, which I don't really like that, because I like the way he doesn't quite look human. Don't make it any easier for him. Have him still struggling with that. But yeah, it's not quite the same.
To me, it's
when they
similar.
Introduce him into the continuity. Sorry, Chris, but they introduce him into the continuity of they introduce him as just IP now. He's just part of the Marvel universe. They bring him into Hulk, and then they turn him birth of a superhero. Like, I don't see Aaron Stack as a superhero. He's just a guy trying to help, and that's it. He just happens to be a machine. And also, when you bring on someone, because Marv Wolfman was one of the young guys at this point, one of those young guys that was wanted to write for Kirby while having Kirby draw his ideas. It feels hollow and like fan fiction to me. It just...
I'm wondering at the choice to put Ditko on the book when Kirby left. We talked about, you know, the house style evolving, and so they've got Kirby that a lot of people are considering this relic on the book. It didn't do so well, so they say, well, let's just put another relic on the book as artist, right? Let's just keep with that. We've got these two older guys who still need work, but we don't want to put them on Spider-Man or the X-Men, so we've got this book. I actually spoke with Herb Trimpe about, you know, how is it that he wound up on all the licensed books? You know, he did Shogun Warriors, he did G.I. Joe, and he said, I wound up on them because no one wanted to do them. And I was getting a paycheck, so I said, okay, I'll do them. And I wonder if it's a similar thing here, where it's like, Machine Man, I don't want to do Machine Man. So, well, I'll do them. I could use a few bucks this month.
Yeah. I mean, it was Kirby's exit from Marvel and comics for a little while, but Ditko's return to Marvel. So it might have been their big moment. It's like, let's capitalize on this guy too. And you mentioned Herb Trimpe. Just looking at his career, I feel like Marvel was not very good to him by the end of his career. Like, once he got to the later stages, you know, he's one of those creators, you know, he didn't die all that long ago. You know, but Marvel just kind of, it seemed like they phased him out a little bit, despite like all of the great work he did. But
I was thinking very specifically about this when we were talking about Kirby's style not fitting in, because I was thinking, you know, you look at some artists, whether it's comics artists or artists in museums, where they kind of stumble onto a thing and that's their thing, and that's just what their stuff looks like. And then you have other artists, and Herb Trimpe was doing this, where he was told, can you make it look like Kirby? We're going to put you on Hulk. And so he's like, yeah, okay, I'll make it look like Kirby. And then, you know, he stayed with him for a while, and it got to the point where, hey, you know, do this style. And at the end, he was trying to do kind of almost an image style for a little while. And whatever the style du jour was, it's like, oh, now they're having him do that. Yeah. And I don't think that worked for Trimpe. And, you know, Kirby, you can look back, and at the time, maybe this wasn't respected, but now looking back, he has this body of work, and it's Kirby, you know, and Ditko also. But I agree with you, Christopher, that his earlier stuff, it just felt like he was more excited about it, and later he was kind of dialing it in. So there are these interesting aspects, though. The industry often says, oh, this is the hot look, can you draw like that? And then artists have to make this decision. Do I want to be the guy that just does what they're told and then I get a paycheck? Or do I want to say, you know, that's not really me. I need to do what I need to do. And then maybe you don't get a paycheck, but then you've got a body of work. And so you got to give Kirby credit that everyone's saying this old dinosaur, this old man. But he's like, well, this is what I do.